Listen for words of faith from the early Christian communities in Paul's letter to the Galatians. Now, before faith came, we were imprisoned and guarded under the law until faith would be revealed. Therefore, the law was our disciplinarian until Christ came so that we might be justified by faith. But now that faith has come, we are no longer subject to a disciplinarian. For in Christ Jesus, you are all children of God through faith. As many of you as were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. There is no longer Jew or Greek. There is no longer slave or free. There is no longer male and female. For all of you are one in Christ Jesus. And if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham and Sarah's offspring, heirs according to the promise. For early reflection on the life of faith and trust, we give thanks.
Listen for words of faith from the Gospel of Luke. After having finished this discourse, in the hearing of the people, Jesus entered Capernaum. A centurion had a favourite attendant who was, at that moment, sick to the point of death. Hearing about Jesus, the centurion sent some Jewish elders to ask him to come and save the attendant's life. The elders approached Jesus and petitioned earnestly. "This centurion deserves this favour from you," they said. "He loves our nation and was the one who built our synagogue." Jesus set out with them. When he was only a short distance from the house, the centurion sent out friends to convey this message: "Rabbi, don't trouble yourself, for I am not worthy to have you enter my house. That's why I didn't presume to come to you myself. Just give this order and my attendant will be cured. I too know the meaning of an order, having soldiers under my command. I give orders and they obey." On hearing this, Jesus was amazed and turned to the crowd that was following and said, "I tell you, I've never found this much faith among the Israelites." When the messengers returned to the house, they found the attendant in perfect health. For the word that was in the beginning, for the word that invites and inspires, for the word embodied in all creation, we give thanks to God.
Listen for words of beauty in the poem Angels by Mary Oliver. You might see an angel anytime and anywhere. Of course, you have to open your eyes to a kind of second level, but it's not really hard. The whole business of what's reality and what isn't has never been solved and probably never will be. So I don't care to be too definite about anything. I have a lot of edges called perhaps, and almost nothing you can call certainty. For myself, but not for other people. That's a place you just can't get into, not entirely anyway. I just leave you with this. I don't care how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. It's enough to know that for some people they exist and that they dance. For words of creativity and inspiration, we give thanks.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, people on Zoom. Welcome. Sorry, struggling through a throat, just used to be a 10-day cough, and now there's a 10-day throat. A 100-day cough. Just before I begin, I just wanted to say that, in fact, that was what I would call dialectical thinking of this and that. Often we think in a very linear way. So this morning, before I begin my meandering, I just wanted to say that dialectical thinking is holding opposites together, opposites in tension. For example, our good friend Lionel is promoting quite a bit the dialectical theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Now, Dietrich Bonhoeffer has left us with a saying, Lionel, that we just continue to use. And what's that saying? The beyond in our midst. So when we say presence and absence, it seems like it clashes. But truth is often held together by opposites. So all to say is this morning you'll hear some opposites, which have been new to me as I've been grappling with these notions. For me, notions are forms of discourse, not just thinking, but that it's the way we live and be and act. So, this morning's reflection. Living within colonised space and expressing non-being. Living in colonised space and expressing non-being. Okay, you got that? Holding together divine and human non-belonging and belonging. Living within colonised space in ancient Judea. Actually Galilee, because Jesus is at this point in Capernaum, which is in Galilee. We now enter the year of the Gospel of Luke, which we believe, with some certainty, but that it was written about ACE, after the Common Era, 80. Throughout Luke's Gospel, Luke locates Jesus and the ancient Jewish Judean society as living and engaging in the congested intersection of competing, capricious, and autocratic power. That is, power of the colonial power of Rome, with willing collaborators like Herod and some of the Jewish religious elites. Roman colonial rule remained an implicit, brutal presence, threatening people who destabilised the colonies by the fear of death, and death they did bring. Luke often hints of the destruction of the temple in ACE 70 by Vespasian and his son Titus. The Pharisees are a separate religious power group who sought to reform Jewish society based on their puritanical ideology and understanding of a strict God. In Luke chapter 6, conflicts emerge between Jesus and the Pharisees about the Sabbath. Luke writes that the Pharisees were filled with fury when they see the radical freedom of Jesus. Isn't it interesting that you're religious and you want to help people and you're filled with fury when they don't actually think and believe the way you do? Bill Loader notes the Pharisees were like some Christians today, for whom the law or commands are turned into a set of demands which become almost a set of qualifications one had to meet before one was acceptable to God. They see biblical laws not as a source of generous guidance, but as an instrument to oppress oneself and others. Conditional. Yet you only belong or are included if you comply with their practice and view of the divine, which is what colonial empire is. We include you, you belong, on the basis of our demands and conditions. Living within colonised space in our modern world, and I start from the early 20th century. The fragility and intense vulnerabilities which Jesus and Judean society experienced in such a colonial space are in a sense outside of our experience in our democratic, post-democratic existence, I would say. So I thought for us today, being colonised looks more like living in the former Soviet Union. Orlando Feigs, in his book The Whisperers, Private Life in Stalinist Russia, shares the story of Antonina Golovina, or in Antonina Golovina, if you want it anglicised, Antonina Golovina and her colonial trauma. Antonina was 8 when she, her mother and 2 brothers were exiled to a remote gulag in Siberia. Her father had already been arrested and exiled. The many relatives, and they had many relatives as kulaks, dispersed, but they were captured and equally also exiled. And their crime? For being kulaks, that is rich, so-called rich peasant farmers who challenged collectivisation. So after 3 years of intolerable conditions, her family returned from Siberia in the 1930s and settled in a kulak town. Then to the trauma of Siberia was added the fear and isolation of experiencing brutal, even sadistic social inferiority. As Feigs writes, being branded a class enemy, she was excluded from good schools, bullied at school by students and teachers, struggled to get jobs, faced persecution and arrest over and over. So she and her family were initially shunned and excluded from every activity of social life. They belonged, but on a very marginal space. This created social inferiority and deep fear which remained with her all her life. In the Stalinist Soviet Union, most aspects of one's private and social life were shaped by the state through legislation, surveillance, and ideological control. The only way to survive was to be unseemly transgressive, to avoid even whispers and live in secrecy. So to survive, Antonina was determined to overcome all the challenges at every level of life. She was determined. She studied hard at school, joined and excelled as a member of the Communist Youth League. She concealed her background, constructed another identity, became a member of the Communist Party, not because she believed in the ideology, but to divert suspicion. She married. She had 2 husbands, 20 years each. Never, ever shared or spoke of her true past. Not even in whispers at night, because the whole thing, I don't know if you followed any of Soviet history, whispering at night, parents would whisper and children would tell at school because they were forced to. Whispering, even whispering. She concealed her background, never shared her past. She concealed the truth of her past. And the real power of the Stalinist regime was that it entered into all the people, millions of ordinary people who silently accepted and internalised the system's basic values, conformed to its public rules, and perhaps collaborated in the perpetuation of crimes. Simply put, in a kind of a summary, simply put, while in her public life, Antonina Golovina accepted and participated in colonial life, it was only a marginal belonging because she knew she never belonged. Yet to express her limited freedom, she chose non-belonging at a deep level of being and meaning. She chose non-belonging at a deep level. Thirdly, living within colonised space and expressing non-belonging. In our story in Luke 7, we find an unexpected, if you listen to the story, it's an unexpected and astounding engagement, if you think about it in a colonial space, between a set of socially unequal actors within this inflexible ancient Roman colonial structure. You stepped out of line and you were hung upside down on a cross, as it happened in AD 69-70 when the Romans came and smashed Jerusalem and put down a rebellion. It was brutal. But in our story today, in this story, a Roman centurion highly values his young slave, highly values a centurion of power, highly values an inferior. And as the slave is near death, he approaches Jewish elders for support. And we're struck by this form of compassion between unequals. We learn that the Jewish elders equally value this pagan, non-Jewish colonizer and are eager to approach Jesus and ask for the healing of the slave. In this context, this was a highly transgressive act. An act which both colonisers and colonised would find contradictory and acceptable. How can they get away with it? Look what we're experiencing. An act which both colonisers and colonised would find contradictory and unacceptable. And potentially, because potentially the Romans saw each act as destabilising and transgressing the Roman colonial expectations, as the Jewish leaders feared that it would upset the balance of ordered society. As William Loader writes, some strict Jews of the time would have said, "You should have nothing to do with this man." It is not hard to imagine, he continues, how the reasoning might go. He's a foreigner. He's also part of the oppressive Roman system. He's likely to have dirt on his hands, and he must surely be impure. Yet the Jewish elders contradict and approach Jesus, and Jesus consents to heal. Then, as Jesus approached, the centurion sends friends to ask Jesus to heal at a distance. So we observe the centurion's cultural sensitivity and his respect. So he must be aware of the Jewish notion of ritual purity. He's done his homework. That if Jesus enters a non-Jewish household, he would be considered ritually defiled and impure. Then the centurion simply, humbly, and in faith, says to Jesus, "Only speak the word and let my servant be healed." Only speak the word and let my servant be healed. And one of the few times that the Greek word is amazement, in amazement, Jesus says to the crowd, "Not even in Israel have I found such faith." Now that in itself, some Jewish people would have found to be an insult. So in this story, each actor occupying a different subject position, each belongs within a hierarchy of power and rights at a cultural, social, and economic and political level. Yet each took a position of non-belonging. Each took a position of non-belonging. An example being, the centurion consciously sacrificed, and I use the word very strongly, sacrificed, social and political power and authority for the sake of the well-being of a slave. Jesus expressed his power and authority to heal a non-Jewish person and to make the outrageous commendation of the centurion's faith being greater than anything found in Israel. And that is outrageous. To conclude, And here I might get a bit complex, so please forgive me. And I do invite you to ask questions or have a conversation afterwards, which I love. And you can correct my meandering and my heresy. So, in conclusion, finally, as we reflect on the significance of our two stories, Golovina and the story in Luke 7, a few comments. Antonina Golovina, that's how you say it in Russian, accepted and participated in colonial life in marginal belonging because she knew she never belonged. Yet to express her limited freedom, her like the hairbreadth of a freedom, I mean, are they words? To express her limited freedom, she chose non-belonging at a very deep level of being and meaning. And of course, within the book, she tells this story when she's in her 80s. She's finally in her 80s. And Feigs goes into when the Soviet Union fell, he went into the archives and saw this story that she revealed in her 80s to that point. Non-belonging, and yet finding meaning. And her freedom was to choose secrecy and to avoid even whispers of her past. And which of us could criticise such a strategy? Because colonisation, as we see in Gaza, Palestine, parts of Africa, and now Iran, I mean, what do you do? In our story in Luke 7, each actor also rejected belonging to the colonial structure. Do we agree on that? Do we agree on that? Am I correct? We agree on that. That they rejected belonging and participating according to the rules and the expectations. They contradict their subject positions and treatment of each other in their actions. They chose non-belonging. Yet differently to Golovina, as they also chose open, transgressive acts. Acts which would lead to marginalisation, humiliation, and as we know, death, the death of Jesus. Together with Jesus, each actor in the story collaborated in the practice of caring and of compassion. Acts which restored dignity to different people in a time where dignity was only given to some special people. And why is collaborative care and compassion such a threat to ancient colonial and even today's neo-colonial power? I love Bill Loader's words and I share them. Because Jesus' vision went beyond the individual to a transformed society. And that means regime change, doesn't it? That, and I continue his words, and that had social and political implications. Both dimensions matter, the individual and personal, the social and the communal. And this implies working for justice. So, my theological conclusions. In this story of Jesus, the absence of the divine is implied as infinite, universal source of life. There's no mention of God in this, but that's what I'm saying. The absence of the divine is implied as infinite, universal source of life. And the presence of the universal divine with Jesus and in the healing implies divine non-belonging. That no group or culture owns or restricts the presence or expression of divine life. So in some ways, none of us own the divine, or however you want to talk about the divine. The dialectic holding divine and human non-belonging and belonging together is also recognising that non-coercive belonging is expressed where collaborative acts are performed. That non-coercive belonging is expressed where collaborative acts are performed. of seeking care, compassion, and justice for all within any context of life, including these ancient colonial contexts. And the context of Russia and Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, divided Africa, in our own country, which remains still at some levels a settler colonial society, and our complex neo-colonial capitalist contexts. And it is this story of Jesus, and it is for us the story of Jesus, and these notions of the divine and human non-belonging, yet belonging. When we express collaborative ventures of compassion and justice that empowers and lures us, this is the uniting church. This is our DNA.